Hey all, hope all is well. This is another video in the Road to Grandmaster series. And in this one, I'm going to be covering my round 8 game against Brandon Jacobson from the Charlotte GMIM Invitational in January 2019. Brandon is actually a very talented American junior, one of the best we have actually, and is, at the time of me doing this video, has 2 GM norms, so is well on his way to becoming a GM, and just very talented, works very hard in the game, and plays all the time. He's very active, so I'm confident he'll get there. He's also been an opponent I've played quite a bit over the past year or so that I've been playing, because we tend to actually find ourselves at the Charlotte event quite often and play each other at this event. So this will be the first of quite a few games over the course of this year I actually wind up playing him. In any case, if you've seen any of the previous videos, you know this tournament has not gone well for me thus far. I've already lost, I'm already on -2. I've lost 2 games, have a bunch of draws, but have really struggled to get anything going positively. Yeah, I was hoping to turn that around. Every game is a new opportunity to turn around, so without further ado, I started with d4. Brandon went knight f6, I went knight f3, and Brandon went b6. b6 is really possible in these types of structures because I haven't gone c4. Note that if I went c4 and moved 2, b6 would be ill-advised because I could take more control of the center very quickly. Like if knight c3, bishop b7, I could kind of shut out this bishop with d5. And white should be better in a position like this. Whereas in the position where I start with knight f3 instead of c4, after b6, if I go c4 now, which I actually did, black can actually just go e6, and it's not such a big deal. I can't actually seize the center with d5 as easily now. So a little bit different move order trickery. Anyway, c4, black actually went bishop b7, which was kind of surprised. And I just was arguing for the fact that I can't close the center like that. But Brandon was arguing that Brandon's actually arguing that this position is playable for him, and that d5 he actually is a quick counterplay on the pawn. I didn't take up the challenge. I maybe should have taken up the challenge and played d5. I wound up just going knight c3 and ignoring this. And now Brennan played e6. Yeah, d5 now is kind of ill-advised move, because if I go d5, there's bishop b4, and this pin coupled with the pressure on the d5 pawn makes this just a very playable position for black. So because of that, I went for a3, and I really didn't want to go for these. I didn't want to play against these Queen's Indian type of setups. So the point is, with a3, I pretty much get rid of this irritant move, bishop b4, and I can still play in the center with d5 at some point. I can consider playing bishop g5 and so on. Black played g6, which was a bit of a surprise for me, because you don't think you can double fianchetto in a position like this, but it's actually kind of playable. And yeah, I guess Brandon had actually been playing this double fianchetto stuff for quite a long time, but I just kind of thought he wouldn't play it against me, because it just seems kind of slightly incorrect in my opinion, but it's very playable. And I definitely he definitely was up to the task and was challenging me to refute the setup. I was in no mood to refute the setup and play super dynamically, because I kind of did not in good shape mentally or physically. And so I went for bishop g5. It's a move, maybe not the best move, as we'll see in a little bit. So bishop g5, h6, and now bishop d2. And yeah, this was a bit of the problem, is actually I should have probably just dropped the bishop back to h4, but I was not really in the mood, after bishop h4 with this move g5. I just thought at some point this would be very uncomfortable, and I thought that maybe black could ultimately secure the two bishops. Now here, it would not be an ideal way to go because I have bishop e5, and you don't want to play this move f6. It's a very ugly move to secure the bishop pair. So the point is you don't play g5 right away. You go like bishop g7, and that's how I go e3, and then black goes d6. And now my bishop doesn't have access to the e5 square, so when g5 comes and then knight h5, it's just a goner. And so I wasn't so keen on giving up the bishop pair in those types of positions. So because of that, after h6, I went back to d2. But then the question begs, why did you go to g5 in the first place if you're going to go to d2? Kind of a passive decision. My argument was that on d2, maybe in some lines, the h6 pawn is a little bit loose, and just this construction is a little bit weaker than it would have been if the pawn was on g7. It's somewhat of a nuance. The point is, in some positions, you can actually go queen c1 and attack the h6 pawn, and then force it to make a decision once black has castled, because then it would only be protected once. And then sometimes, like, the king has to go to h7 to defend that pawn, and then the queen can go to c2 and put pressure on this diagonal. So that was kind of the idea, but again, it's very, very specific, and the bishop on d2, meanwhile, is just a misplaced piece. So bishop d2, bishop g7, g3, I need to get on with my own development. And now c5. And again, this is another flaw with my setup. I was thinking, well, I should go g3 because e3 did not make sense to me. Now that my bishop is on d2, if I play e3, it seemed that black could, it seemed my black could just easily attack my center with c5 and d5, and my bishop wasn't really primed to deal with it because it's in the way of the queen, and the bishop really wants to be on b2 now. And I was thinking that one day maybe my bishop would come back out to f4. So I just didn't want to shut it down with e3. But playing g3 invites a weakness along this diagonal, and so c5 is pretty clearly takes advantage of that. And now I have to make a really tough decision because, again, I lack coordination here. Black is striking in the center. Not a good opening for me. I played d takes c5, resolving the tension. And this type of exchange, black is happy to see, usually. Because now black is has potential to have a nice central pawn duo, which would be very, very ideal. So just a tough position to be in, honestly, with this duo. So in any case, I went bishop g2, castles, and now black went d5, again taking advantage of this center. And already I'm in danger of just being worse, because if black pushes with d4, I'm in some trouble, some serious trouble. So really tough position to be in. So I played c takes d5. One other move I was looking at, but I didn't want it playing, was queen c1, and that might have been a decent alternative. The point is, again, that I eyed this h6 pawn. That was the idea with bishop d2 in the first place. And if king h7, I have knight a4, and I target the c5 pawn and threaten to win it, actually, because I also have c takes d5 and knight takes c5, unleashing the queen on c5 as well. So that was an alternative. And note that a move like, let's say like d takes c4 is actually ill-advised because of knight g5 check, and there's a tactic on that bishop on b7. So I'd pick up an exchange, and I'd have a winning position here. So probably should have continued with my own plan of queen c1, but I missed that knight a4 detail. So c takes d5, e takes d5, and now queen c1. And the difference here is kind of striking, because now black can play king h7, and I went b4, and it's not as effective. The point is that I was trying to saddle black with an isolated d pawn, and so I was trying to rip open the queen side in this way. But now black also has ideas on the long diagonal. Knight e4 is a possibility. Just not the best way to do it. And also, the isolated pawn is not that bad on d5. It controls certain squares. And so I actually missed white's reply. Black's reply, knight bd7. It's a very, very strong move. Point being that after b takes c5, which I played, and knight takes e5, black's knight is very, very active on the queen side. And moreover, this d5 pawn is protected a lot of times, so it's not really an issue. And the rook can also come to c8. So just a fine position for black. I went rook b1, just trying to deal with the knight b3 fork threat. And black played rook c8. And you can see now my queen is potentially getting mauled on this file. I went bishop h3. I thought it was a little bit of a nifty move, trying to target the c8 rook. And frankly, I didn't see many good alternatives. Black is, really the one playing here, threatening d4 in this position. My knight is dislodged. My queen is hit. Really an ugly position to play. So bishop h3 I thought was a really important resource, actually. But it does allow d4 anyway, and then the game gets really kind of sharp for a few moves, because it's like, I can't move my knight on c3 because, again, the rook is bearing down on my queen, so I have to make a decision. I went bishop takes c8, but this allows bishop takes f3, e takes f3, d takes c3, and this is a somewhat forced sequence. Bishop takes c3, and queen takes c8. And the dust is settled, and I have a rook and a pawn for the two minor pieces. So technically the material is equal, but if it's tough to say who's going to have the advantage in the long run. I think it's a little bit easier to play black's position because I have to be really, really coordinated to ensure that I don't get into trouble, because if any of black's minor pieces somehow get active, I'm going to have problems controlling them. The good thing, though, is because black has no pawns in the center, it's going to be very difficult for black's minor pieces to have a good outpost. So I figured that if my rooks have open files, my king is relatively snug on g1, I thought I might be able to get some counterplay and be fine. And in an ideal world, a dream scenario, I was thinking that if I was ever to win the a7 pawn, and I have this rook's pawn, and the queens come off the board, I know that minor pieces, the knight in particular, really struggles to defend rook pawns. So in my dream scenario, I was thinking if I could win the a7 pawn, trade queens, that would be the best I can get. So I tried to get that going in some way, and I started with bishop d4. That hits the knight on c5, tries to get a secure a7 pawn, and even entertains the queen on c8, so fair enough. Knight e6. Now I went queen b2. Why did I go queen b2? Well, if I play bishop takes a7, black can go queen a8, hit my bishop on a7 and the pawn f3. Not really what I want to happen. Losing this f3 pawn would not be desirable, because then I'd have all these light squares weak around my king. So didn't want to lose that, so I went queen b2. Note, I could also trade queens, but if I take on a7, black just goes rook a8, and this kind of will fizzle out. I mean, I can't. Also, my rook will get harassed forever like this, potentially, and I could agree to a draw here. But, yeah, I just can't hold the a-pawn, frankly. So even here, I might go back, but this position is not one that I can win at all. So even though I was struggling, I was still trying to win these games. So, yeah. So, anyways, I went queen b2. Black went knight takes d4, getting rid of my strong bishop. But after queen takes d4, I thought it was okay. And the reason for that is that, again, this knight on f6 does not have a good outpost in the center. And the bishop is certainly on this diagonal, but it's not really hitting anything. So I thought maybe I can still try to play for something here if I win the a7 pawn. So that's what I was trying to do. So black went queen f5, again, trying to hit my weak f3 pawn. And I went king g2 covering. And then black went h5. And I must say, h5 was a move I certainly underestimated. I think my thought process was, well, you know what? This h5, h4 stuff can't really work, can't really cause me any problems. And I thought, especially because I have 4 pawns here, I'm kind of unassailable, right? And my queen is even eyeing h4. That wasn't the best judgment, and we'll see why in a bit. I went rook fd1, again, trying to stay active, also denying the knight entry into the game still. Additionally, my queen still eyes h4, so there's no h4 plan. And even a move like knight g4 and covering on my queen doesn't work because of f takes g4 and the queen is targeted. So this actually doesn't work because I could just take the queen. And note that if queen takes b1, I have queen takes g7 check intermediate move, and this position would actually be better for white. So really, I'm still controlling the knight for the time being. Black went a6 just to defend that pawn, get it off the a7 square. And now I went rook b7, and I got really excited here because I was thinking I'm still controlling this knight, and now I'm kind of getting all my pieces, my heavy pieces activated. So I felt good here. Black went queen c2, I think searching for some activity. I went queen d3, getting my queen off the line of the bishop, and now even willing to trade queens. Because if queen takes d3, rook takes d3, this knight on f6 still has no squares to go to, right? They're all covered. And my rook is eyeing f7 and is threatening rook a7. And again, my dream scenario was picking off the a6 pawn and trading queens. So if I got that type of position, I'm rolling. So after queen d3, black went queen c6, avoiding the trade of queens. And now I went for rook a7, and I thought, wow, this is a great situation because I'm winning the a6 pawn by force, right? There are two attackers on it, and there's no way to defend it. And this is great. Now I can run my a pawn up the board. And then black played h4, and I realized that things were not so simple. The issue is that, first of all, I don't want to play g takes h4 because that weakens the f4 square chronically. And now a move like knight h5 is just devastating. I mean, this knight, if this knight gets this f4 square as an outpost, there's all these mating ideas that happen. The bishop might even take advantage of the square, support the square. Just a huge problem for me. So I don't want to allow that. And then the other thing is I have to constantly worry about h3. Constantly worry about h3 check. Now here I could just take it with my king and then go back. But maybe I'm not always going to have that luxury. And this is something I had to worry about and just made it clear that this position is not, you know, just this amazing, amazing position. So yeah, so I went for rook takes a6. Black went queen c8. And I went for rook d6. Centralizing my rooks, my heavy pieces. See that Alekine's gun on the d file. I thought, okay, I'm still in control here. Note that the queen on c8 does eye h3. And so now h3 check was played, and my king has to go back. And now this pawn is a thorn pawn, an effective mating device for my for the black side and against my king, and it's something I really have to worry about and be alert to. Yeah, I thought that maybe this pawn could be a weakness, because if I ever am able to play queen f1 and queen takes h3 or win that pawn, then I'm 2 pawns up and my king would be snug again on g2. But again, it's not so simple, not so simple. So black played queen a8. Good move. Eyeing the a3 square, eyeing the f3 pawn. Note that I can't push it because of queen g2 mate, and my queen has to kind of keep an eye on that. I went rook d4, and I thought this was a step in the right direction because I thought, man, if I can win this h3 pawn, I'm good. So I was thinking I can go rook h4 check, secure that pawn, and be in a great shape. Black went for king g8, moving the king back. And this is actually a really, really clever move and one I underestimated. Because now, if I go rook h4, my rook is actually really misplaced on h3. So, for instance, if, what should we do? Let's say rook e8, rook takes h3. even if you just look at this position for a moment, you see that my rook on h3 is going to take some time to get out, and you really have to wonder if it's going to actually work. If this position really is going to work with, I need this time to get my rook out. It's just a tough decision to make. I was not convinced, and because I wasn't convinced, I actually went, I did go rook h4, but it wasn't convincing. I mean, I really could have considered rook d8. That would have been the more prudent move, trying to get the queens off the board. And something could have happened like queen a5, rook d4, and some type of, almost like a repetition like this could have happened, because black does not want to trade the queens, and because it's going to be hard to challenge the a3 pawn. But, man, the issue was after rook h4 and queen c8, which black played, I have a really hard time snagging this pawn cleanly, and I just went back. Because if I go queen f1, now there's some other things to worry about. I mean, first things first, black could make a move like queen c6, eyeing the f3 pawn. That's one option. Black could also play, consider getting the rook into the game. Again, it's just not clear with my rook on h3. My coordination is totally lacking. Tough spot to be in. So rook h4, queen c8, rook d4, queen a8. And then I went a4. I decided, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't try and snag this pawn on h3, get the a pawn up the board. Black went rook e8, getting active, good move. And now I went king f1, trying to get my king kind of off of this, off of the back rank mates that look like they would happen with the e1 square. But again, this is a step in the wrong direction, because now black has queen a5, and it's clear that it's going to be very, very hard to make any progress here. Essentially, the issue is I have to guard the e1 square, and it's just not hard to win the h3. It's not easy to win the h3 pawn. So again, I'm kind of tied up. I played queen c4, but a better move would have been queen b5, challenging that queen straight away. After queen a8, I could go back, and then we could have a position that looked like this, where I do wind up snagging the h3 pawn finally. I do get my rook into that space I didn't want to get it to, but at least I can hold on in this type of position. My choice of queen c4 did not challenge the black queen, and now black went queen a8, attacking my pawn, and I didn't want to repeat. That was probably the more prudent decision. I went rook 4 d3, just defending, and you could see that I'm kind of not making the progress I want to make. And now black went for g5. Now we are both in some time trouble here, I will say that. But now it's me that has to worry about some threats. Well, what is the threat? g4. If g4, I cannot capture, because the queen will go all the way to h1 with checkmate, or even to g2. Both are sufficient. And it's a real thorn to deal with. It's a real issue. Very difficult to deal with it. I went rook c1, and black went knight d7. Excellent move. What I was looking at was, okay, g4, and if g4 now, I have queen c6, stopping this idea, right? Getting in the way of the queen, and now I might liquidate these pawns, trade the queens, get to an endgame where I think I can hold. After knight d7, I have a world of pain with this fork on e5, and it's a really nice tactical resource that a rook takes d7 just fails to queen takes f3. And all of a sudden, again, there's queen g2 mate I have to worry about, queen h1 mate, and if my queen tries to interpose and get in the way of these checkmates on this diagonal, now, not queen takes f2, now there's queen e2 check. And after king g1, queen e1, you can see again how this h3 pawn is a real thorn pawn, creating back rank mate threats. So huge problem for me. And I kind of just self-destructed. I kind of panicked here. It was a huge cold shower just to have this happen to me, and I just completely unraveled. I went queen d5, which, really was not wise. And now black went knight e5, and I realized, oh my gosh, everything is collapsing because my rook on d3 is hanging, the pawn on f3 is hanging, and it's just a tough spot to be in. I played queen takes a8 now because I pretty much had no choice. Rook takes a8 and rook a3 defending that pawn. But now black went bishop f8 with tempo, and I completely unravel. Better in this position was just to, make a move like rook b3, give up the a4 pawn, and try to free myself and try and get this h3 pawn somehow. I'm not sure how, but maybe in a dream scenario, black would allow my rook to come over to h3 like this, and I could hold the position. I think black has better resources. Perhaps knight g4 here is a good move. But rook a3 was terrible because now after bishop f8, I have to move it again, and black's now getting a tempo to activate the bishop. I should go rook e3 here again. Try to hold the position together on the third rank. Hold that f3 pawn on the third rank, because after rook a2, now knight takes f3, and now my position is totally collapsing because now h2 is hanging as well, and then the h3 pawn becomes a real runner. I went king e2, and now g4 was played. Really nice move, brilliant move, cementing that knight on f3, still eyeing the h2 pawn. And now, even the rook can come in with check, the bishop can get involved, huge problems. I played rook c4, attacking the g4 pawn, and then black just played knight takes h2, which has the benefit of also just protecting the pawn. And now the knight can even consider going back and playing h2 at some point, so I'm lost. I played f3, trying to free my king, at least get my king closer to the queen side or the king side to deal with this h pawn. And also I thought maybe I could defend horizontally with my a2 rook, but it's really not a great move. f5 was played, reinforcing that pawn. Note that if knight takes f3, a little bit of hope chess, rook takes g4, check, and the knight on f3 is hanging. So f5 just reinforces that pawn on g4 before taking on f3. I capture on g4, and then rook e8 check. Really good intermediate move. King d2 I played. Knight f3 check, forcing me back further. And note that taking on g4 is not even necessary, because now that the rook and the knight are in the game, h2 is just a very direct threat. So very, very, very tough spot to be in. I went for king c2. Black went rook e4. I went king b3, and you can see my king is just totally on the run now. Rook takes a2. And after rook takes a2, I actually resigned, because if I play king takes a2, black just plays h2, and I can't even stop the pawn, because if rook c1, now there's knight g1, just blocking my path toward the h pawn. So, very, very devastating game. I thought like the opening did not go well at all, but at least it was still equal. And then I managed to trade to kind of like a interesting piece and balance where the position is still about level, and I had things under control. I had black's minor piece under control until I didn't. And allowing this h-pawn to run, especially with h5, and then allowing it to h4 really was my undoing. And as we could see, that h-pawn was the deciding factor in the game. So always be wary of these rook pawns, particularly when they come up the board. They agitate your king because they really can be dangerous. Anyways, after this game, I was on -3 in the tournament, and still with no wins to speak of going into the last round. And my health and my condition was really deteriorating as the tournament went on too. I did allude to it in some earlier videos, but I was dealing with serious stomach problems dating back to the Bay Area International. And during this tournament, I just could not focus, and they really did turn to a head in this event. So I was definitely not at my best physically, and boy, did it show. Anyways, thanks for watching. Please like and/or subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support the Road to Grandmaster journey, you can do so by checking out the description in the link below. Thanks. Bye.